So, welcome to the next edition of the Rare Business podcast. With me today, I have Chris Lewis, who is the author of Too Fast to Think, and is also, let me get this right, founder and CEO of Lewis Communications. Is that right?
Yes, Lewis PR. Changed its name from Lewis PR to Lewis just recently because
the eponymous.
Exactly. So I'm a former journalist and started the business over 20 years ago.
Right.
Now, so lucky to be in the right place at the right time.
Okay. Can you tell me a little bit about sort of the whole sort of Lewis, the sort of work that you do, and so we get a little bit of a picture about yourself and what the almost kind of the context for the background for the book, I guess, and what you're seeing.
Yeah, very good. So Lewis, in quantitative terms, is around about 50 million sterling as an organisation.
Right.
It's headquartered in London with 25 offices around the world and 650 staff. They are full-time employees, and the offices are wholly owned. The things that probably distinguish it are that it's employee owned, so we believe in an employee ownership model where we share the equity structures, and that's really on the common sense belief that if people have a stake in something, they're far more likely to devote their time and enthusiasm
and do the right
thing. The other thing that just differentiates us is that we think very long term. Mm-hmm. So we're not just interested in next year's P&L or the year after that. We are committed to a long-term strategy, and the result of that is 20 years of uninterrupted growth and profitability.
Which is sort of, it feels a bit like, and very much aligned to how family businesses would run themselves, because they take the longer view, because it's almost like, well, I guess you're creating a family, I guess, but being employee owned in many ways.
I think sometimes with employee ownership there's a lot of confusion that somehow it's sort of based on an ersatz type of kibbutzism, and it doesn't have to be that way.
No. Because
you can be just as entrepreneurial and as ambitious in employee ownership. The key differentiation is who owns the balance sheet, and how the reinvestment occurs, because there is a lot of talk about having very bright women and very bright men at the top of an organisation as rainmakers, etc. I would rather have an averagely talented team which is funded well for the future, with reasonable expectations of growth, and develop a longer term plan rather than live for 90 days, the next 90 days, the next 90 days, etc. So the people who run this organisation own it, and they work in it, and that makes a huge difference in terms of how they think about the quality of life, and also the way we train people, for instance.
Sure.
So training is another hallmark of what we do. We spent over £1 million alone last year on that, which is a good
heavy chunk,
a good 25% of all of our profits back into it. And this is one of the problems that people have with investment in training. We think about that as being word of mouth advertising. We don't think about it as being a written off cost. We know people will leave after we've trained them, but we have two alternatives. People will leave without training, or they'll leave with training. Which would you rather have?
Wow.
And so consequently, when we look at a millennial generation of people coming through, those millennials now outstrip the boomers by a considerable proportion. And if you talk to a millennial, 4 years is a good knock in a company, 5 years maybe, which means that your staff churn is 20%. If somebody stays with you on average for 5 years, staff churn is 20%. And so if you want to keep people longer, you have to invest in them, you have to move them around the international structure, you have to be able to train and develop and grow with them. I think longer term.
But I guess that also is, this is a slightly divergent sort of conversation. But I guess it's in many ways, if you invest in training people, then you just increase the likelihood that they are going to stick around for a bit longer and stay with you as well.
Well, I think when you train people, one of the things people don't actually see is the old Platonic truth that the teacher is always the student. You'll know this from teaching your marketing subject. That when you start teaching something, you start to learn it yourself. And so we encourage a lot of our senior leaders to teach as part of the Rise Academy, which is the internal university that we have, which is based in California, in Southern California. We take people out for a couple of weeks. We teach them how to do investment appraisal, how to read balance sheets, how to manage clients, how to solve problems, and we teach them how to paint at the same time. Paint as in using arts, and because one of the things that we found consistently over a period of time is that the creative provenance, the place where people are having their best ideas are very common, in that they are often not away from work, they're often on their own, and they're not trying.
So that brings us very nicely round to this new book that you've written, Too Fast to Think, which the subtitle is How to Reclaim Your Creativity in a Hyper-Connected Work Culture, because you talk about creativity in these moments and things, and but let's kind of back up a little bit, and can you tell me a little bit about why this book, why this subject, why now?
Well, the subject of the book, Too Fast to Think, is probably a little bit better than some of the titles we thought about previously, which was too long to read, too expensive to sell, too late to drop. All these. So Too Fast to Think, because it summarised the hypothesis of the book is what would happen if the brainstorm was the wrong process.
Yeah.
Because I suspected for a while that brainstorms weren't really producing a creative understanding. Next hypothesis: what would happen if the people working in the creative industries weren't the only people being creative? Maybe everybody's working in the creative industries these days, and really the creative process is one of problem solving. So I set out in the book to go and interview people deliberately outside the creative industries, the traditional.
Yeah.
So I interviewed the head of the Royal Navy, I interviewed film directors, I interviewed clergy, academics, scientists, and said to them, where are you when you get your best ideas? And the commonality in their response was striking, and that they all said they're on their own, not at work, and not trying. So this therefore gives a conclusion, which is that their subconscious must have some sort of role to this. And when I probed this a bit further, it became quite clear that there was a method which was not being used consciously, not being taught.
Yeah.
In that, if we looked at the 4 I's in the process, you have this induction, incubation, inspiration, ignition phase in the ratio of 40, 30, 20, 10.
Right.
So 70% spent on induction and incubation, even before the ideas were coming. So the creative process is probably longer than we thought, and probably also much more random than we thought. Although it was clear in talking to some people that they deliberately inducted over a period of time and took a 48-hour break and just trusted that their subconscious would come through with these epiphanies.
Before we kind of go on, let's kind of let me be clear. Just so for my kind of clarity, and also for the people that are listening to this, is that when we talk about creativity, I mean, you're talking about it then as almost a bit of a process, but that could actually be creativity. You could substitute for possibly innovation, I guess, in an organisational kind of context.
Well, I see them as being interchangeable.
Well, exactly, and so that's what my question was going to be. When we talk about creativity, are we? I know you've done all these interviews. I mean, is it that the idea is that actually there's no such thing as creativity, or alternatively, actually everything is creative?
Well, I think there are some standard definitions of creativity. Previously unconnected matrices of thought.
Yeah,
that's one definition. My favourite is creativity is really the history you don't know.
Right. Okay.
The creativity's all been done. All the ideas have been done. They've been done. If you go back far enough, into Socrates or Plato or Aristotle, the ideas have been done.
Yeah.
It's just that people have forgotten, and then they get reinvented,
repackaged. All those.
Yeah.
Different
Do you want another cup of tea? Are you?
No, I'm fine.
And so the greatest conceit that the creative industries have got is that they've got a new idea.
Right. There
is no such thing as a new idea. There's a reinvention of an idea or repositioning of an idea, but sometimes people have this great conceit that they've got a new idea.
Yes.
And so consequently, some of the best creatives are also historians. They look back and use ideas that have been recycled. I mean, if you're being creative in the fashion industry, for instance, you see the trends coming back over and over again. I think I've got stuff in my wardrobe which is now bang up to date, fashionable, which I haven't worn for 30 years. So.
And people are forever trying to reinvent the little black dress.
Exactly. So my concern was that I came up through the educational establishment on the wrong side of the tracks. So, I wasn't a successful student.
Mm-hmm.
I rebelled against just about everything I possibly could, and subsequently became very interested in what Sir Ken Robinson had written about educational performance. And so when he agreed to write the preface for the book, I was delighted, because he's a hero.
No, he's a giant.
And so when I told Ken what I was thinking about, he particularly liked it, because when you look at the acceleration that's taken place in terms of the compression of people's time, they're so constantly interrupted now that they're pulled back into their analytical state. So if we think about the university system, I think Ken's phrase is that he said that basically all primary education is now an extended application for university status.
Mm-hmm.
So people are embarking upon this Western reductionist model, which says we're going to analyse and analyse and analyse, and the profundity of that education is tantamount to success.
Yeah.
And yet it's clear from talking to some of these very successful high achievers that it's not the profundity, it's the parenthesis.
Mm-hmm.
It's the difference between going down deep into the level of analysis,
mm-hmm.
or alternatively being able to conceptualise and contextualise what they're thinking in order to join the dots.
Mm-hmm.
And my thesis in the book is that every time we're interrupted by one of 100 emails per day, that we're being dragged into that analytical sense, and we're not spending enough time on the conceptualisation and joining the dots.
Yeah.
And indeed, as the news becomes more and more filtered, we can become so overloaded that we stop making time to listen to other people's opinions, and we become an echo chamber.
Yeah.
So the no platforming phenomenon that we see in university is a good example.
Because what's really interesting, because I think I made a note that you talked about in the beginning of chapter 3. He said that whilst tech has allowed us to become more productive, it has come at a cost to creativity and well-being. And that's actually reminded me of a piece of research that a professor at Duke University up in the States did, where he looked at he was looking into the measured self, sort of wearable technology and things. Yeah. And he got a bunch of his students. And he said, "Okay, let's kind of go and figure out kind of what this stuff does and what it means and things." And what they found was quite interesting, that they found when they measured an activity, whether it's fitness or steps or whatever, that actually, so the quantity of the activity goes up, but actually their sense of well-being and engagement with the activity goes down.
Yeah.
And I thought that was fascinating. And I thought, okay, I wrote a piece which sort of laterally transposed that sort of finding over into, I said, well, let's look at, if the same thing happens in the workplace, and we're measuring the hell out of employees and everything else, does that mean that actually the quantity of work might be going up, but the quality may actually be going down? I just went, I don't know. And I just thought it was an interesting sort of parallel to what you were talking about in the book, around sort of like, it makes us feel that we're doing lots more, but actually we're achieving a lot less.
Yeah, I think there's a certain zigzagging that goes on, where people create the illusion of speed in order to keep up with the pace that technology sets us. Mm-hmm. But no matter how sophisticated the technology gets, we seem to find it very difficult to find the off switch.
Yes.
And just apply it. And so if we come back, I mean, you and I have both done MBAs. Mm-hmm. Eventually I got back to mine. After being a motorcycle mechanic for years,
right.
So I eventually got my way back into a business school. But when I was there, one of the best definitions I heard of business was from the Harvard Business School, which defined business as the management of social relationships for profit, where profit may be financial. Mm-hmm. I found that one of the best definitions of business that I came across.
That's really interesting.
The management of social relationships for profit, where profit may be financial, and it says that business is not a technical process. It's not a financial process. It's not a legal process. It's a social process. And those people that are good at a social process will probably become quite good at business, because it involves negotiation and compromise.
Yeah.
The notion of somehow the rapacious, you're fired type of business person being a representative sample of the skills you need in business, to me, is a nonsense. the nonsense that goes with Alan Sugar and with Donald Trump, which is somehow that good business people have to be rapacious, or Philip Green, or Mike Ashley, that somehow these are great representative samples of the business world.
And what it takes to, and role models of what it takes to sort of to succeed and things is...
Yeah, they're terrible role models.
Yeah,
and because the business involves the ability to negotiate and to compromise and have some form of stake in what you're trying to do. Now, if you go home to your partner of an evening and you sit down and your partner says, well, actually, look, I've done the washing up several times over the last month, and by the way, your performance in this area, you failed to win that bonus here, so we can't go on holiday, and now what I'm doing is I'm scaling back all of your expenditure in this area. Well, you would think that was ridiculous. So why are those relationships that you have socially at home any more metricated than the ones you have at business in business? Because to have that type of short-term relationship in business would be as ridiculous as it would do having that at home. You don't forge long-term relationships doing that.
Smacks of being a sociopath as well.
Well, exactly, it does. And so the short-termism is a disease that I feel is broken out in business, which has forced people to move so fast that you're actually unable to grasp the essence of their own potential. Now, this thing about potential is very important to us, because the idea of the business as a community is that you're there to liberate each other's potential. It's a mutual thing. And why does that matter? Well, because potential and prosperity, from an economic point of view, they go hand in hand.
Yes, of course.
If you can't release that potential in those people, and it's particularly incumbent on people who have achieved and climbed a ladder to make sure that they periodically go down the ladder, fixing every rung on the way and making sure that it's still serviceable for other people to climb it.
So do you think that actually, do you think that there's going to be a time where we'll break out of this, there'll be a bit of a epiphany and something will happen, or is it going to be a case of there'll just be a few people that'll turn around and just go, we have to do something different, and it becomes a path of diminishing returns?
I think we're seeing a series of tipping points, where if you look to the reputation of business in the UK, maybe even in America, that it's probably at an all-time low. People see business as being of questionable value to the community. And in America, they have perhaps a little bit more natural approach to business. They see it as fire, a perfectly natural thing for people who are cold to start a fire. Fire can cook your food, it can warm your house. It's a great servant. But one thing about fire is it's an evil master. And we've seen now for 20 years or more a corporatist approach to business, which has favoured large corporations that think in terms of cold balance sheets with remote investors, where those people are a pension fund in Zurich, and they don't really think long term. And so when you look at this polarisation of people who have wealth and people who have not, the link between those two is the ladder that people have to be able to climb. And when you get to a situation where everybody is forced to be able to climb the ladder within 90 days, or forced to be able to eat to the beat, you end up not only having a very unsuccessful business model, I mean that's obvious in terms of its short-term greed, but you also do something much more dangerous, which is endanger the reputation of capitalism itself. And that's why people, I feel, are turning their back on it, and that's why I think entrepreneurs have got to have something. Well, basically, if you're going to provide a position of leadership as an entrepreneurial company, you better have a bloody good opinion about what you're going to do if you get into a position where you have a platform. And so this book is a call to understand how to release people's potential better. It's a call for the education system to pull in people much more who have been out there, not just in business, but in other walks of life. And it's a call to those people who have achieved their potential to remember the sick, to remember the weak, to remember the needy, and to remember that they belong to a community, and no tree can survive if it doesn't have any roots. You have to get back and you have to give back to it. So you have to reinvest the money, you have to reinvest in training, and you have to find the time to write a book that actually talks about these things.
Well, and sort of bangs the drum a little bit and says, wake up people, and let's make a change.
Just, I don't think it's enough for large corporates just to go and pick a minority group and sponsor them as if it's some sort of CSR fig leaf. which was going to guarantee their probity. The surface area of contact now in large corporations is too great. You can get to everybody all the time, and so.
Well, it's fascinating you say that. I mean, because it's so I've been thinking about and also talking about people talk about loyalty, like customer loyalty and loyal relationships. And so the research shows that historically research shows that loyalty is gained or driven by 2 points of contact. At the point of sale, and then also at the point where something goes wrong. And that's the majority of the loyalty driven for the majority of those two places. But I've also been positing this idea that actually I think there's a third dimension, or there's a third area, and that's sort of takes into account that people are intrinsically lazy. They just are. They're short of time, like you say in the book, short of time, but they're lazy. They want to do the right sort of thing, but convenience trumps consciousness in many ways. And so there is many people are almost living on that convenient thing, that they just want to choose something, and therefore sometimes they choose something which is aligned to making an impact, as it were. And so there's an alignment around with brands and or companies that are trying to do something that matters and that makes a difference, and it's not just CSR. It's like, because that's that seems like an add-on, but it's almost like where a company's fundamentally said, we do this and we do this kind of too, and so it has a bit of a mission which is beyond the 90 days and beyond the sort of the shareholder value and things, but actually it has more of a social purpose, and I think that's an interesting sort of dimension, but it sort of becomes both a challenge and an opportunity for many firms.
I think that's true.
The next question I was going to ask is, so imagine I've got an executive or a professional that's sitting listening to this and going, okay, crap. Yeah, we're struggling to innovate, we're struggling to be creative, we're struggling to bust out, we're struggling to differentiate, we're struggling we feel like we're in this neck and neck race, and we want to try and do something different to leap forward, because we feel like we're stuck in this maelstrom of stuff. If I would say to you, right, Chris, if you were to give me 3 big bits of advice, just instructions, do this, what would they be to that kind of person that feels like they're in that sort of space? They go, I'm ready, but I don't know how.
Stop it.
Stop what? Just stop everything. Just step off.
Well, what you're describing here is this is the left brain writ large. It's the compare, contrast, analyse bit, which is going, you're not innovating enough, you're not doing a good job.
I know, indeed. But this is the life of many of the executives and professionals that we talk to.
Well, yeah, and this comes directly from the balance sheet. So somebody needs to ask where the imperative is, because these senior executives, they're being pushed into the river, by the bushel basket load, and at some point, rather than consulting with them, we've got to go back upstream and find out who's pushing these people in. And actually have a look at why we're wasting so much talent in those senior teams.
Yes.
And we've got to say, why are we asking all these people to zigzag repeatedly, when if you actually gave them a bit more time to really think through a plan and really get some situational fluency, they actually might come up with something which is much better long term. And because all the time these feelings are linked with a lack of confidence, and these things, I know that men do this quite a lot, but probably women do it twice as much, because one of the things we see when we're trying to coach the difference between the genders is that we see men with confidence levels up here and skill sets here. And with women, we have very high skill sets, but very low levels of confidence. Constantly, because this is sort of like, well, are you up to performing at this level? Do you think you're really boardroom material? Do you think you actually, do you not feel guilty balancing your role as a wife, as a mother, as a senior exec? I mean, these are things which are constantly there in this left brain analysis. And we've developed some very fine university educated people who do nothing but analyse the fuck out of everything. And after a while, you've got to say to them, can you just stop that and start thinking more conceptually, thinking about how your problem could be solved at a wider level. Think about how these things relate. Who would like to see this problem solved? Who could be an ambassador to make this happen? Because we teach people how to analyse and criticise and contrast really well. we hardly teach them at all to conceptualise or contextualise. And that's, to me, where there's a fundamental problem in business education, because we're not actually teaching those types of joining the dots type of skill. Partly because they don't have a narrative of their own. You can always tell somebody to analyse something much more.
Well, in many ways, we can't measure it either. So it's one of those kind of funny things. It feels a bit too uncontrollable for the dominant way of doing things.
Yeah. So I mean, you could say, once you've tried and tried and tried and tried and tried, and you've really worked yourself into the ground, what is the best way of working up an appetite for something except by not eating? Or what's the best way of really appreciating your relationship with somebody, except from being apart? Yeah. Hunger is the best pickle, and sometimes senior executive teams have just got to stop picking the scabs and start thinking much more positively and much more constructively. Because if you want a team to bond, competence has to follow preference. They get good at what they like doing.
Yes.
I've never met anybody that doesn't like being creative, that doesn't love to solve problems. And if we give those people enough room, guess what? They solve the problems and they get good at it.
So in terms of practical things, you said stop it. It's a big instruction, really. Stop what? Stop meetings. Stop sort of answering emails all the time. Stop giving out instructions. Stop. Kind of what?
Give yourself a chance.
Or just step off and give yourself a bit of space to do nothing.
Well, if you've got, you've got 100 emails a day on average, at least. You've got all the social media on top of that. You've got all of your meetings. You've got your family commitments. You've got, a huge number of demands that people are going to make on your time. So, but if you say to anybody, how do you maximise your time? Well, when's the last time they sat for an hour and absolutely did nothing? Sat in a quiet room and just did nothing at all.
Interestingly, I spoke to a guy actually as part of this series, a guy called Stephen Arstow, who runs a business called Tower Paddleboards out in the States. Yeah. He's just written a book, which I think you'll love. It's called The 5-Hour Workday.
Well, this is an interesting theme because
it's the constraint sort of thing. It's like you force things. You cannot do more than 5 hours and then you're done.
Well, that rather presupposes that the brain isn't working subconsciously on all these problems all the time, no matter what you're doing.
Sure.
And so it's one of the things that we are working on here, which is how would you implement a 6-hour day on a 4-hour week? How would you do that? What are the legal and employment implications of that? We'd like to be able to do it because we think it would work. But when it comes down to this, if we look at the technology has given us these wonderful productivity gains over the last 20 years, tremendous productivity gains. But this is not a linear relationship. You get to the point where the technology has made people very productive, but it's actually undermined their creativity. So they end up being very accelerated in what they were doing previously. But when we're looking at the way business has got to perform in the future, there was one question that I came across in this book when I was interviewing the head of Chelsea Arts College. There's a remarkable man called George Blacklock. He's a very talented artist in his own right, but he spends most of his time teaching. And I said, how do you teach? It's always a good question to, how do you do it? And he said, well, I have really one question that I ask them. And he said, well, I get these students come to me and say, look, I've done this. They're very proud of it. And I always ask them this question: why have you decided to do it in such a conventional manner?
God, talk about picking a fight.
And it's such a brilliant question that every chief executive, any leader in any walk of life could use that.
Yeah.
Because the only thing that matters in the future is, if we want to innovate, is why do we keep doing it in such a conventional manner?
Sure.
Why do we have a business day that starts at silly o'clock and ends at silly o'clock? Well, because that's how it's been done. And people are afraid to step away from that because of this short-termism and because of this remote ownership problem, which says, well, I understand that all these employees are going home at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. What the hell are you doing? Well, that's a Victorian
Well, indeed, it's a construct from history.
And if you're a knowledge worker, then surely we have to start taking entrepreneurial risk in the area of creative provenance.
So here's the one thing I want to go back to, just to challenge you a little bit, because you talk about these technological tools and how it's driven sort of productivity, yet the economic stats don't really sort of support that in aggregate sort of terms.
And productivity growth?
Well, kind of, yes. And so my question would be, is it a bit like, actually, we're doing more, but we're not doing better? And is that maybe the kind of challenge where we've got to the place that we've got to?
Well, we're doing the same things faster. The question is, should we still be doing the same things?
Well, yes, that's probably a better question.
And so I see a lot of executives, we have 350 clients around the world, and so we see a lot of people who beat the crap out of themselves because they want incremental performance. And there comes a point where, if you've done your 10,000 hours and you're really good at something, what is the best way of refreshing that? Is it better to keep on kicking the arse out of it, or is it better to stop, or to create a space in your life where you can pulse? People are very good at 45-minute levels of concentration, and then they need a break.
Yes.
But we work them like they're mules, and then we're surprised at the epidemic of stress. And this is not just with senior executives. Alistair Coles, who's the chaplain at St Andrews University.
Yeah, I read that there. It's about the.
He's perhaps the most interesting interview in the book. He said that when he started, there were 300 kids that he would see. Now there are 30 over 10 years. These kids can communicate with everybody, but they can't converse. And if they can't converse, and if you talk to the millennial generation, they will say, I couldn't phone them up because that's just too invasive, too direct. But if you can't converse, you can't negotiate.
Sure.
If you can't negotiate, you can't get on terms with the business.
And how can you connect?
Well, you can't. There's no rapid exchange of ideas, and so you can communicate, but then you end up without any form of conversation. And what's more is that they don't read a wide range of material. So when you look at the relationship between knowledge of the world and the ability to compete, that's a linear relationship.
Sure.
And if your knowledge of the world isn't that great, then your ability to compete is very low. I mean, it doesn't stop them getting degrees, doesn't stop them getting A levels, doesn't stop the academic qualifications going up and up and up.
No, that doesn't mean to say that you might know a lot, but you don't necessarily understand it.
Well, the most important thing to understand is actually how you work, how you get your best ideas. I mean, no two people are alike in terms of where they get their ideas. The Dror Bencherschritt in the book, who's an Israeli architect living in New York City, he actually programs himself before he goes to sleep with a problem. He'll read on something and he'll go to sleep, and in the morning he'll wake up with the idea. He does it really deliberately.
Which is great. I mean, it's almost a bit like it feels like to me that you're reminding us of much of the wisdom, the old sort of sayings, the people who go, I'll sleep on it, as it were, because it's almost like giving yourself or a chance to access your subconscious and things. And it's like a lot of these answers, a lot of these ideas are part of our sort of almost like familial wisdom that gets kind of passed down, but it almost like the world has become really noisy that we've lost sight of them.
Well, also think of all the things you really like to do. How many of those things would you still like to do if you had to do them in a tenth time?
Well,
you like eating, great, so you're going to have to do it in 5 minutes. You like drinking with your friends, you've got to guzzle it all in 10 minutes.
You're stuffed and drunk in a
any task, any pastime,
sure.
If you accelerate it, it ceases to become fun, and that's true of business. That if we really want businesses to perform, we have to remember that profit is a byproduct of healthy and successful cultures. It's not the cause. It comes of a healthy and successful culture, which sure you can make it 30%, 40% profit in the short term if you want. You can do that, but you also got to use your judgment as to say what is healthy for this organisation in the longer term. If people tend to go at this like it's some form of dress rehearsal, it isn't, and they just end up burnt out and overused, and and with their confidence eroded. And we can see people, when we should see people well into their 70s still working because they enjoy it, because they're having fun, and
there's nothing wrong with that.
There's nothing wrong with that at all. And also, some of the kids that we see coming through, they look as if they're not having a great deal of fun.
Sure.
And we have to remind them that this should be fun. It should exactly be fun.
So I have a couple of questions before just to wrap up. So one is a bit of a selfish one, and because I'm doing this as a bit of a poll around people that I'm speaking to. So I like I mentioned before, I wrote a book, came out in April. It's called How to Wow, and I've been asking people for their own perspective of what does wow service or wow experience mean to you.
I've never tried to wow anybody. So I'm just not a wow person. So
heard it here first, folks.
So I think it's a question of what is more of a wow factor. Is it discovery or is it description? I think if anybody describes how wow they are, they're probably not very wow. If you discover something about somebody that's wow, then there probably is.
Right.
So I tell my team, never ever under any circumstances attempt to sell anything to anybody. Just be yourself and have fun. And one of the few things that we take seriously here, is probably the only thing we take seriously, is a sense of humour. That if people haven't got a sense of humour, they can't work here.
Yeah.
Because it tells us some very important things. Seriously. It's because it tells us about their intellect, it tells us about their timing, about their judgment.
Sure.
It tells us about their ability to make people relax, to lead. If you don't have a sense of humour, it's like you've no role here.
Yeah.
And those are the things that kind of, to me, that would wow me. People who are relaxed, confident, having fun. I mean, it sounds very boring and very common sense.
It's absolutely fun. I must hasten to add, when I say wow, it's actually a bit of a distraction, because actually it's not about these fancy things and the bells and whistles and things, and actually sometimes it's more often than not just about being brilliant at the basics and making people feel comfortable and doing the right things at the right time.
There is that. I think Pippa Malmgren's a good example of this, because I was with her on Friday saying, look, how would you like to be introduced at this evening's launch? And she said, well, I'm a sort of an intellectual slut. And then she said, well, actually, I don't want to overdo the intellectual piece.
Pippa,
So this made me laugh a great deal, and I said, well, look, I disagree with you on both counts. You definitely are in it. I mean, because I said to her, okay, look, just to prove the fact that you are intellectual, what was the one thing that you did in the White House? And she said, well, I looked after two things, 9/11 and Enron. And I said, well, what did you do on Enron? She said, well, I wrote the Sarbanes-Oxley Act with Senator Sarbanes and Senator Oxley.
And that doesn't make you a big brain.
And she said, most people, you never heard of that, have you? And I said, well, I've heard of it. It's like it's kept the accountancy business running for the last 20 years.
It's only a little thing.
And so that was kind of wow, because she was very modest about it. And so I think when you discover those things,
yes,
and if you discover them from people that perhaps haven't volunteered them, that can be wow.
Modesty.
So let's face it, if you're in a good relationship with somebody, you probably discover those things every so often anyway, because a good long-term relationship has those types of features where somebody will do something which just kind of reminds you why you're in the relationship with them.
Yeah. So thank you for that. So my final question I always ask at the end of these interviews is this. I can usually guess the answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So Chris, is there anything that you would like to shamelessly plug?
Well, I think obviously the book is something it's quite important. I mean, I have to say, I sit on the board of the Royal Society, and I work with the Chelsea College of Art, University of Arts, London, and working with those types of august institution is a bit like inviting Fred Flintstone to Downton Abbey, and so I'm enormously grateful to them for even allowing me to hang out with them and listen to how they work. And so when I came to write this book, I didn't have any expectations it would be a bestseller. Like, it was certainly not, within the first 10 days or whatever. I had no expectation of that. And the people that I would like to plug are the people that are actually in the book, the people who gave up their time to actually share their experiences on the ladder. And this is Sir Martin Sorrell. Like, why would Martin spend time talking to me for a couple of hours? I'd like to plug him because he's a great leader.
Sure.
George Zambellis, one of the most unusual thinkers in military thinking, described the Royal Navy as an hourglass. So, bottom half of the hourglass, everybody has to do as they're told. In the top half of the hourglass, we have to teach them that we have to undo all of that teaching, which is a remarkable thing to say. The first thing he did at the MOD when he was head of the Royal Navy, because it's dry, was he winched a massive drinks cabinet up the side of the building and swung it in through a window and installed it in his office.
Right.
To show that actually it was okay to have a drink, and it was a tradition in the Navy anyway. And these people are unconventional in their approach. Doesn't mean to say they're lacking in credibility.
No.
So I would like to plug the unconventional thinkers, and I am just really a mouthpiece for them.
And so then I'll plug your book, Too Fast, I think.
Too long to read.
Too long to read. Because
too dull to sell.
It's being modest now. And Emma, who sat in the background, has been very, very kind of quiet. Has kind of gone going red and kind of like.
Well, I think.
But I think it touches on a huge phenomenon, which is this kind of. We're in this middle of this maelstrom, sort of kind of technology and work and pace of life and time and all these different sort of things, and it's wringing the creativity and the product, the real productivity out of us, and it points to some clues and some opinions from different sort of people around how we can recapture our creativity.
I think the question to ask people is, how many people do you know that can get really good at something they hate? And if we want people to get really good at business and to provide better leadership, they have to enjoy it. And if you can't enjoy everything when you're going faster than is comfortable for you, and there's a finite limit. There's a finite speed at which you can cram food in. There's a finite speed at which you can cram experiences in, and that's even for the very, very talented high achievers. They get burnt out, and so we have to have a different relationship with it, and that has political implications. It has educational implications, but it also has implications philosophically, which is, if we're not here to enjoy it and reach our potential,
what's the point?
Well, what's the point? Yeah.
I think that we should leave it on that. Thank you, Chris.
You're welcome.